is without ongoing therapy and educational support, what are the prospects, realistically, of this group being able to achieve their potential? Which one of you wants to go first? Helen?
Well, my feeling is that we never actually understand their potential because we don't have a baseline that is a good baseline, and because we wait until they fall before we give them support. And that's the point I was trying to make earlier, that in education, you don't get an education and healthcare plan until you've fallen below the second centile, which is 2 standard deviations below the mean. And that's what, as an endocrinologist, I fought so hard to prevent children becoming short. I can't make a short child taller. I can't make a child on the second centile of intelligence cleverer, but I can help the ones whose potentials are higher achieve their potential. And I think it's criminal not so to do. And I think to do that, what I've understood is it takes a lot of different people. We haven't got the skill set. We can't possibly hope to have the skill set. I see it because I'm a generalist at heart, and I'm very old, and I've seen the development that's happened. But we clearly have explosion in neuroscience, explosions in oncology, explosions in understanding neurobehavior and neurodevelopment, and also a whole will to help people with disability. So why aren't this group being prioritized? And I think it just kind of passed us by because we were so desperate to cure. And I think we've got evidence now, if we could but look back, to give more information on what cure looks like and to feed back into treatments and choices. And I think basically we need to connect with the oncologists and the neurosurgeons and the radiotherapists who are all working flat out and create a separate pathway. And I think unless we have that pathway in the world today, as I understand it, children won't get it delivered. And I think it ought to be a right for every child that you don't get your brain tumor touched unless you can guarantee that your brain injury will be followed and researched and supported. And that clearly needs psychiatry, neurobehavioral, neuropsychology, neurodevelopmental, and endocrinology, as far as I can see, with all the support behind it. And these services have been pulled in rather than mandated from the beginning. And if we did that continuously the way we follow growth, I think you could achieve your potential. That's what we showed with growth. That's what we'll show with this.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I would add to that that one of the themes that I've been hearing is this problem that at the moment you have to fail in order to get access to appropriate services. And that obviously is ridiculous, whether that's access to a specialist dietitian or all of those specialties that Helen's just mentioned. And even in cancer, we've moved on now to try and actually to prevent cancer rather than to actually have to cure it. And we kind of have some idea of what the pathway will be for a patient. And I think you've heard that we have some of the building blocks to actually address and to give people the opportunity of having maximum potential. I don't think that we always know what the potential of an individual is, but we should have an environment that allows you to achieve that, whatever it is. So I think that that's the thing we have to say. And I think it is true that unless there is something specific about our patient group, so those with brain tumours who are going to be surviving and need this individual treatment, if we actually leave them to the vagaries of trying to access the services that are there at the moment, we're not going to move forward. So we need a specific focus, which is why I'm pleased that there is the Success charity that actually has got this very specifically as its focus. We have Cancer Research UK, we have Brain Tumour Charity, but actually the very issue that we're discussing today is that focus. And I think that that's what we need to actually lobby for, to actually get these pathways, to get the individualized opportunity to maximize your potential.
Thank you. Yasmin, would you like to comment from the point of view of a parent, what your experience has been of trying to get the services you want and need?
Yeah, it's very tiring, time-consuming. You feel that the system and the process is there. It just needs to be a bit more joined up. So Shakira left hospital, Great Ormond Street, 2015, after 2.5 years of being there. And she accessed neurorehabilitation in 2016. It took me and Dr. Spadeus a whole year of conversation, emails, assessments, you name it, just to get her into neurorehabilitation. She left in 2016 after 3 months, and again, for the last 10 months, I've been fighting for another block of sessions with the Children's Trust Tadworth, which has been agreed, but it's taken me another 10 months to do that. So what she gained 6 years ago, she's lost in those 6 years, and now we're having to restart again. So those that maybe have seen us walk around, she's not walking independently, she can't stand independently, she's 11 this year, and it stops her development, it stops her social interaction. She can't play and run around with other children, which is what she wants, as she said at the beginning of this conference. She wants to play with children. She wants to run around. She wants to be on the climbing frame. She can't do that. So to access these services that's actually there, we just need that person to link that all together, to identify that need before it's a need, and then put those processes in place.
Now, if we're going to try and get this a service, who's the best placed professional to deliver on this? Now, we've heard a bit about the Brainbow model in Cambridge. I just wondered if a member of the panel could tell us, maybe Darren, it may be Helen, how that operates. Is it a good model? Is it a good, does it have a good track record? Is that the sort of thing which we ought to be thinking about running out nationally? Do people know how much it costs? And there's an idea of what it would then be required if we wanted to try to amplify it.
Well, the first thing we should congratulate our colleagues in Cambridge, actually, because obviously they identified a problem, working with their own patients and their own local charities, and actually have tried to put in place a solution for that. I mean, the issue, of course, is that the solution that they put in place, certainly initially, relied very much on local charitable input, and there has always been a risk for them and for anybody else that having established something, that's taken away if it's not embedded within our healthcare system. I think it's always difficult to know whether there is really a one-size model that fits every area. But what I think we have heard is there are parts of the existing healthcare system that can provide the input that is actually required. But we equally accept that brain tumours cause acquired brain injury in a different way than we might see in other circumstances. So you do need some expertise in relation to that. I liked Naomi's proposal that there would actually be a specific neurodevelopmental caseworker coordinator who, right from the beginning, so from diagnosis, not from 5 years later, but from diagnosis, was considering for that individual child, as part of an MDT, what's the tumour, where's the location, what's the treatment that's going to be proposed, and start to kind of plan and predict what may happen, and then to help to coordinate. So it wouldn't rely on Yasmin or on other family members. It's the system in doing that. Now, I don't know that that is exactly the Brainbow model, and it may be that there are different ways of achieving the same aims. But I think we also have to be aware that we have to cover, hopefully, the whole of the United Kingdom, not in one particular area. So we need to find solutions that are actually available. But I mean, we've heard from a member of the audience earlier, we now live in a different world of Zoom, of virtual. There may be ways of us starting to consider how, in a specific way for these patients and for this pathway, that we could deliver something that has got a chance of being achieved in all of the places, may have to be piloted first, but all of the places, and be sustainable. Because what we don't want is to set something up that people rely on, and then suddenly it has to end because charitable funding can't provide for it.
And I would endorse that. I think the Brainbow model was something we were looking at and that we have also tried to pump prime in that respect, but it's not attractive to hospitals because they don't want to be left with the funding after the funding. They don't want to be left with the salaries once the funding runs out, if a donor gives it, and the donor doesn't want to know that the service isn't going to be continued once the money runs out. So there needs to be a sort of continuation of what service is started. And in the American model, which in America and St. Jude's, they have a big research program, and it's research funded, but also America has a huge philanthropic support to each hospital. But again, this is the model, you do it for 5 years, you get lots of research. That's how the proton beam in America was driven, and then suddenly all the patients think they're getting a wonderful service, and then suddenly it's finished. And even here in the UK, our National Proton Service, as you heard earlier from Phil, has mandated all the pre-treatment assessments, but nobody is funded to deliver any actions from those assessments or mandated to bring them back and look at evaluating what happens. So although it's a mandated trial that they've got trial fundings on, and the proof of whether or not protons work or save the brain or whatever, we're not going to get that data. So unless we actually make sure that we deliver something that delivers an individualized assessment, is interpreted and mandated in the community by a specialist at a centre, spoke and wheel, and then there is somebody to connect it and then bring the child back at intervals to check that this has been delivered, that there doesn't need to be a change in the education and healthcare plan, in the complex care assessment, because most of these children are educated in mainstream school. And mainstream school don't know how to help. And it's very individual for the focal injury. And so we need to get more educationalists involved, and we need to make sure that we're all working together. And I think the only way to do that is to have a pathway, which, by the way, is supposed to have been in children's cancer since 2005. And I'm hoping that we might be able to persuade them this time when they look at the brain tumour specification that they need to mandate for it. Because Darren and I have a suspicion that the money is there, it's just not going in the right place.
And if the money were there, what would you see as the best model? Would this be a hub and spoke model with some regional centres? Would it be some other model? What do you think would work best? What is it that the politicians should be thinking of in terms of trying to lobby government as to the system that ought to be set up?
Well, I think we need to get agreement, and it may be that one model doesn't fit all. And I think London is a special case because we've got the National Proton Centre now. I think the Christie is a special case because they're attracting big numbers, and at least it's one form of capturing them, and they also see other children. So if we could start small, as it were, try and skill up and make sure we get that data back at least and add in a bit more where there's a skeleton there, and then set it up. What I would like to see is that every neuro-oncology centre around the UK has access to a brain tumour survivorship service, and that we help define what that should look like and what would be the best excellent model that we should strive to receive, and that they deliver a hub and spoke to the community.
I mean, I think the first thing we need to do is to define, including working with our patients and their families, about what we actually, want from this in terms of the outcomes. And it may be, as I've kind of alluded to, that there may not be actually one model that suits the geography, but the expectation is it will just deliver to those outcomes and those standards. And then it may be that that we need to do some piloting. But I think what's really important is that we try and make sure that we actually gain, as those pilots are going on, is that there is shared learning at the time. And again, I think this is a relatively rare situation, And therefore, you do need people who have a critical mass of people and expertise for that. But it is quite possible to share learning, but also to share experience across the country without actually geographically being in the same place. So I think that it will start as of a regional model, but I think it shouldn't be that is only restricted in terms of benefit for that catchment area, because that would be terrible, that if actually we're putting things in place that this is not available. So I think that we need to be thinking what our national goals are, and then the regional pilots, if there are them, or the pilots, are different ways of achieving that, but are in parallel.
And if you were to persuade Parliament, or anyone, I think Darren and I were talking that if we could scope this service out and have a professional economist or whatever, health economist, actually look at the quality of life years and the secondary diseases and problems saved, because these cases are costing a lot to the NHS subsequently. And if they change our treatments so that they might be more deliverable and less intensive, that would be a good thing. I think even you would agree that.
So, well, of course I do. I mean, I think what you're probably saying there is that there's obviously a drive to cure more patients. And obviously this is what I'm very involved with. And often that is the most difficult tumours. But actually, there's also a drive to actually cure at less cost. But one of the problems is that the simple measures of showing what we succeed is patients surviving and surviving in the short term. And trials, actually, clinical trials, have those short-term measures as their ultimate goals. But what we really want to be doing is seeing about, okay, we've got a new treatment, what's the impact of that in the longer term? But the only way we'll know is if we collect that data. We already have a system that actually allows you to see something that you've done 2, 3, 4, 5 years or longer ago has had a positive impact on the survivorship and quality of life. So we actually need this system in order to then intelligently look at novel treatments, not only just measured as in you live this long, but actually you live this well.
I'm going to come to Guy, because I think that was a really interesting answer. For those of us who have to lobby, and it applies to Helen, but it applies to Guy if he's having an exchange with a minister, how can we drill? Cost-benefit analysis is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, and particularly when you're dealing with quality of life issues. Although we've already touched here on a number of matters, which is about independence and earning capacity, taking burden off the state. So that is quite a considerable issue. But Guy, what would you think that needs to be put together if one's going to try to make a persuasive case to a minister that this is something which should be rolled out as a piece of national funding?
Hello? Yes, there we are. Right. I think first of all, we need to have the outline of a scheme scoped, and we seem to be well down the route to getting that sorted. And that will be up to Helen and Darren and others to say, these are the people you need to have in your long-term therapy group, the different types of neurodevelopmentalists, occupational therapists, and so on, what will need to be included in the package. We need to make the point that NICE in 2005 said this could and should be done, and somehow it slipped through, and so now is not too late. And then we move on, I think, to say, look, you're spending vast sums of money on treatment, and then they're really left high and dry. And actually, not only is that not good for them, and we've heard the case that looking forward, it's not very sensible for the taxpayer because you're spending all this money and actually you're not doing the most you could to make people economically self-sustaining and paying tax in the future and everything else. But also there is the point which Darren has made just now, and maybe Helen made it too, that if you have proper coordinated services and you start to keep proper records because you know who's had what original treatment to deal with the tumor and then what therapy thereafter, you can start to measure outcomes against the original inputs. Now, that's what the Treasury understands. They do it across the board. And you can say, look, unless and until you get a proper scheme up and running and you get proper records, you're not going to be able to conduct any of the longitudinal studies which say, this works, this is good value for money, or that's just throwing a lot of money, the drugs companies like it, but it's not value for money, or whatever. But you need to be able to get that data. And the only way you'll get that is by having people going on proper, possibly competitive, in the sense that the Northwest may do it a bit differently from the Midlands, which may do it a bit different from the Southeast, as people develop them and work towards best practice, because that's what happens in other medical fields, I know from other sources. And I think that, so I think that would be an important selling point on top of the humane case. You know, we can all go and bang our drum and say these people are a small number, but they need to be looked after. But it's to say you're spending a large sum of money treating them initially. And then, but we don't actually know whether the particular treatment, radiotherapy or chemotherapy, is efficient in terms of the damage it may do and the benefits it may bring. But if you have a proper clinical record going through over 15 years, you then establish that, because you can see that some people have had this and some people have had that, and the people who've had a particular type of course actually are showing markedly better or worse outcomes. That's so in medicine, in all sorts of fields, isn't it? So I think we need to be able to do that. And we need to say, actually, this isn't going to cost a lot of money anyway, because as I understand it, it's not. And it's been ordained since 2005. And we will, and I should say, just for those who aren't here, there are two parents who've been here today who are both members of the House of Lords and are very involved in this. So we will work together with them, and there are lots of people in the House of Lords who will be interested. So it won't happen overnight. We can talk to them, and we do get access to ministers, and we can start pushing it forward. And I see today as a launch pad.
And Derek Thomas, who we will hear from in a moment or two.
And it's cross-party.
And cross-party. We'll be able to... it is cross-party. And actually, I don't know if we should make a political point, but it's noticeable that NICE recommended this in 2005, so it can't just be attributed to one government or another, because the blame seems to lie equally. And it seems to be a classic problem in my experience with the NHS, partly because there are so many funding demands on it. It's often the small things which you just can't get through. I remember a number of other instances where I felt very frustrated when I was an MP that it was difficult to make people realise what a huge difference could be made by relatively little expenditure. I think, I'm rather asking an obvious question, but I think there's a sort of general sense on this panel that it's urgent that we should get these support centres set up. Would that be the general view?
Well, I mean, it's obviously urgent for, you know, the patients and their families immediately now. But as we've heard, if we don't actually start to develop this, to collect this data in a robust manner, it actually means that, you know, the kind of longer term things that we want to look at, just as Guy has outlined there, is, you know, we'll always be kicking the can down the road and won't be able to kind of say, you know, when we try and actually do an intervention, which is to optimize the maximum potential of our patients, that actually takes years, and actually with young children, decades to really know. So we have to start this now, you know, because on a humane basis, but also from that that kind of, you know, metric-driven aspect that may actually be the thing that wins over the Treasury, you know.
And Helen, is obviously charitable resources are limited, but is there any way in which some charitable money input might tip the balance in getting the case made, which then leads to other funds being made available? Because we can't exaggerate our own capacities within success, but nevertheless we might be able, Is there something that we could usefully do which might just help on this?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Well, you're the obvious person to ask.
Well, I never like asking for money, and I know that it's easier to fund buildings and cancer than it is to fund chronic care. But I'm wondering why we saved these children's lives anyway, why we bother to go to that effort if we're not actually thinking about their future. And if we've now got the first cohort in significant numbers who are trying to move into adulthood, and we don't really have a proper adult transition service, and they haven't had the rehabilitation they needed, so they've got problems that have been unaddressed. And if we got this right from the beginning, there'd be fewer of them with, I hope, problems in the adult world. And I think we do need to go across up to 25 and cross services into young adulthood, as teenage cancer have, for many reasons, not least that the young people are still developing, they're at college, they have developmental needs, they have emotional needs, and they have tumours that are similar, actually, aren't they? And then they change. And I think it makes sense, just as they're talking about other endocrine services, which are very topical at the moment, like gender dysphoria, to say that we should be having long-term follow-up until 25, 30, and crossing into adult life so that the adult physicians can learn from the pediatricians. And they're different when you've grown up with something than it is when you have it after your complete growth. So I think there is an urgency. And not only that, there's certainly an urgency to change the mind shift to funders and to say that actually, you know, you're now curing 80%. So let's concentrate on that 80% and make sure they live well and try and hive off the 20% somehow and balance the funds that go into each and how they work.
I'm conscious, Darren, I'm conscious that I promised Helen that we would keep this to within 26 minutes and then we would have Derek Thomas's video. So I always observe the instructions I'm given, and I think we are just on that point. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to say on this topic before we move to the video? Starting left to right. Yasmin.
I think as a parent, what we want to see is a seamless system that's accessible and transparent. When you leave your main hospital of care and they call it step-down care into your local hospital, that's already there. So you step down from one cancer unit to another cancer unit, your local one, you know, for your secondary care. So there is, it can be done. It is being done. It just needs to be done with this service. So we just need to have the right information by the right person at the right time, at the right pace. That's all parents want.
And the question is, who's right?
Yes, I see a hand up at the back. So.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. It's great that we're focusing on younger survivors. But hang on a minute. How about us, the older survivors? I'm one of the oldest survivors in this success group. And I don't know if Catherine's still around. How about us? I've still got challenges. I've got so many challenges that have not been able to be met, and I'm still fighting to get those. I deserve a quality of life, but when I was treated in 1978, there was no support. My family and I fought on our own.
Take this to make sure we can get through everybody. I see 3 questions. We'll take all 3, and then the panel can, and the points are going to be made, and then we'll get the panel just to respond.
Obviously, okay, yep. So I've spoken to a few of you today, and again, it's going back to what that other lady was saying, that because the support hasn't been put in place during adolescence and as young adults. You know, I'm 26 now, and I've come to the realization of what the things which I've been through and that there are subtle needs that I need as well as a person who is surviving brain cancer. And again, during that 25 to 30 is where I also feel like there needs to be a lot more support services there, and there isn't. And at the same time, because I've said it before, but again, because I didn't have that support between 18 and 25 that I needed, I'm only recognised now the support which I've actually need, but actually then trying to get that support doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, then it's really hard to get.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm an occupational therapist, so I'm really passionate about this. And there's three things. One is, aside from 2005 and the NICE guidelines already being published, we already have adult specifications in the NICE guidelines for stroke and for neurodisability. So why not for pediatrics? Because they can copy-paste a lot of it and add all the OT education bits. That's the first thing. The second is you cure the actual tumors, but part of the cutting and the lasering and all of that creates other problems. But we can prevent the other problems because we know they're coming, because we know you have to cut and we know you have to laser. So we can prepare a lot of children with muscle strengthening before surgery, with cognitive exercises, with programs for parents to do while children are lying in bed. That's not a big thing to do. Talk about your quick wins, sir. Sorry, I don't know your name. But yeah, that's all I was going to say. Please, can you do it?
Post-education, as in primary to secondary school, secondary to university, I feel that parents are being left to be the one doing the fighting. And I'm a fighter. I have fought so many ways. But I think where I'm hoping that we can go further, turning word into action, is to go into schools. See, visible illnesses like asthma, school knows how to deal with it. A child with an autism, they know how to deal with it. But brain tumor or survivor of brain cancer, they are not aware. So you have to be the one to be speaking for your child. But I think we've gone to that level that now we've recognized this is no longer a new thing in UK or even in the world, that we need to do more in the education system to bring this awareness. And I think whether we have to write Riley or whatever we want to do, we all need to come together as schools, not going into assembly and talk to children. The kids will be fine because when you make friends with them, you tell them what's going on. But I think the education, the teachers, the SEN, the people who are in the school themselves need to be made aware so that when these children are in the school, primary school, secondary school, university, they don't push them aside because often they make them feel like, oh, we don't understand and therefore you don't count. But I think we need to do more in the education system to ensure that these children are not left behind. Dr. Sweetayas knows, I fund my son privately for the last 8 years for every single subject. That's taking a lot out of a family. It's not everybody that can afford to do that. And I think we need to get to that level where we actually look deeper into the education system, how we can influence with all this knowledge we have and make sure that schools do what they're required to do. The lawyer, Claudia, that was talking earlier, there's a lot of things that education system is missing that we need to educate them. Maybe we'll start with educating them and also making sure that our children get what they're supposed to get as well in this country. Thank you.
One more. That had to be the last one, I think, and then we'll go to the panel and just get responses.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, I must confess I'm surprised, albeit presently surprised, that members of a party that have chronically underfunded and cut funding from disabled people are interested in such a subject, but I am, as I say, presently surprised. And I do think, again, my question is about awareness, because at the end of the day, politicians are reliably informed people and therefore have the same ignorances and biases that people have. And I think when I see just ordinary people that I interact with on a daily basis, what they often think is, well, you've had the surgery, you've had the medication, you've had the proton therapy, are you better now? Is it done now? And so I suppose my question is, how do we actually get the message out there? Not, first of all, not just that we need this, but just the general basic understanding of how illness works and how brain tumours work, because this is not some sort of niche problem. You know, we talk about, you know, as if it's some really obscure thing, but no, it's basic common sense that, you know, illness is not an on and off switch.
Thank you. Now, lots of questions there on different topics. And some people may think they've got something on the panel more to say about one than the other. But I'm going to start with Helen and just work our way down.
Well, I just want to say that please send your thoughts through on the whatever it's called, Vivox, because we'll look at them later and we'd like to know what you think. And I just want to say how amazed and proud I am of all the young people that have actually spoken out from the age of 16, some of whom have been treated twice. And they have a voice that we should hear. And to say that I felt this has been a Cinderella area for far too long, and this Cinderella needs to be brought out of the ashes and onto the ballroom floor very soon.
So in a way, I was going to say something similar, which is possibly the most important thing about success is giving the voice to this specific issue. And actually, already with those questions, you know, we were talking a lot about trying with new patients, we're, you know, trying to prevent the damage, which of course we want to do. But actually, incredibly importantly, we've been told, excuse me, we're here. We actually also need to actually have our issues addressed. So quite rightly, that, you know, that has been noted, and that is just as equally important. So I think that what success can do is give a voice to this very specific area, because I think it hasn't had one until now, and that probably, by working together, can actually form the messages that hopefully we'll be taking forward for those kind of actions, and also helping us to, you know, it's not for me and Helen to design the service, it's for us all to design the service.
Speaking as I would say that the message we have to get across to ministers and the NHS is that the department must look at this holistically, from diagnosis to the end of life. And that's so, as I said earlier, for two reasons. One, for humanity, for humaneness, and secondly, value for money. No-brainer then, isn't it?
I think, you know, some of the really good statements and questions there. It is about changing behaviour, and, you know, Darren and Ms. Aquilina will know that whilst I was at 2.5 years at Great Ormond Street, I wasn't sitting down by my daughter's bed. We were changing behaviour, changing language. So she wasn't a complex health needs child. She was a child with complex health needs. So you put the child first. And I got a lot of doctors to change that terminology, because she is a child and we want to be treating the child. Yes, the doctors have such a hard task. They have to treat the area that they're specialised in. But we need other people to be looking at the rest of the child so they don't fall behind in their development and stuff. So it is about educating. It's about prompting. It's about reassuring. It's about saying to professionals, challenging in not a critical way, but in a say, we've got the information here, we have the data here, you just need to use it.